Very pleased to have four esteemed panelists that are very seasoned executives in venture investing. Without making a direct introduction, we're just going to start with Sam at the end and come right down the line. They'll introduce themselves, their history in the fund and the thesis for their fund, and then we'll get right into the content.
So thank you very much. I'm Samuel Levy. I am one of the founders of Lauxera Capital, which is a Paris and San Francisco-based health tech investor. We are actively deploying our debut fund. It's a 262 million euro fund that we raised during COVID. My background, I'm American by birth, although I lived in France for about 11 years in Paris. I am a physician by training, but during my second year of medical school, I actually invented a medical device with a classmate of mine. We spent, the company is in its 14th year. The company is called Allurion Technologies. I led it with my co-founder for 10 years. I led all functions in our vertically integrated Medtech company and took it from an idea in a napkin through this year we're going to do about $70 million of top-line revenue. And so I built the quality system. I've designed and led the clinical trials. I've led the regulatory process, and so have a lot of scar tissue on my back. And Lauxera is really a firm where we try to combine investors on our team and operators to hopefully be more than just money.
Good afternoon. Alex Schmitz, a partner at Endeavour Vision. We're a Medtech-focused investor investing across devices, digital health, tools, diagnostic, and tech-enabled services. We have about $1 billion under management, currently investing out of a 2020 vintage fund, Endeavour Medtech Growth 2, that's a $375 million fund split pretty evenly across Europe and the US. We're typically investing about 15 to 20 million per initial investment as part of larger commercial scale-up rounds. So we're later stage investor. Team is split across Europe and the US with about 11 investment professionals. And like Sam, I'm an American who's been over in Europe now for 20 plus years, about half of which as an investor. And then prior to that, spent about 9 years in an operating role with an interventional cardiology company and helped scale that business from 0 to 300 million in revenue globally, about 180 in Europe. So similarly, I think focused on the investing side of things, but also have a kind of deep operating experience myself and with our other investment professionals, partner pretty closely with the companies that we back to help them grow and scale.
Cool. My name is Assaf Barnea. I'm running Sanara. Sanara is actually today 2 funds based in Israel. The first one is a joint venture of Philips and Teva Pharmaceutical. We do early stage, very early stage, like $1 million, $2 million investments. We have 20 companies like an incubator VC, investing in digital health, medical devices, and bioconvergence, which I'm going to elaborate a little bit. What do they mean by bioconvergence? Second fund, which I just launched now with my teams and partners, called Sanara Capital. We do post-incubation A round. We have Philips, then again, as an anchor investor, and a few other strategics and family offices. I'm also, for the last few years, I'm the chairman of the Life Science Board of the Israeli Export Institute. So we have in Israel about 1,800 life science companies, close to 2,750 of those are digital health related, 300 of those are device related, and about 300 therapeutics and biotech. So I'm promoting about $8 to $9 billion of life science export out of Israel on a yearly basis. I used to be a consultant to the venture capital team of the World Bank, of the IFC in Washington, so I've been looking for equity investments in Israel and build some global innovation hubs in growth markets in India, in Brazil, and others. It was a privilege to do so, and I'm happy to be here. Oh, and if those of you are going to ask me, just we've been teasing one another. Yes, my background is a professional basketball player. We've been asking did you at least, because being 6'8", so some people ask me, did you at least play basketball? So at least I'm lucky, and I did. I was a professional for 14 years. I played for Seton Hall, winning the biggest championship back in the 90s. So this is covered as well. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Assaf. Diana Saraceni here. I'm co-founder and general partner at the Panakes Venture. We have about 300 million under management at the moment, of which almost half is to be invested in new companies. We primarily invest in Medtech, but also in biotech, therapeutics now. We primarily invest in Europe, but also in Israel and in the US. We primarily invest in A round, but also in B, C, and up to pre-IPO rounds. Our ticket size will do anything between 5 and 10 million on average on a first ticket. About myself, I have over 20 years of venture capital experience. I co-founded Panakes long ago, about 20 years ago. I also co-founded another investment firm, which is, with the two companies, I've raised about 7 funds, different generation, different economic cycles, different outcomes with lots of success, lots of failures, and overall a positive return for investors.
And you skipped right over Seton Hall and went to play for the Knicks, is that?
Of course.
So thanks for the great introductions. I want to come right out and ask up front. So many folks come to me and say, how do I get to these investors? And I talk to all the VCs that say, I get between 10 and 30 decks on my desk a day. Share with the audience, if they didn't have the good fortune to get on your agenda here, maybe they're trying to reach you, your colleagues, or if they're not at these conferences, how do people get your attention from when they send you a deck? Is it an intro through a partner, an advisor, a colleague, or what do you look for in that email or that deck that captures your fancy enough to say, let's have a management discussion? Sam, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think I'm relatively new to this job. I've been doing it for 2 years, and one of the things that I've discovered is how important focus is for our investment team. We have a limited bandwidth, and so we have to be spending our time on the deals that most reflect our strategy and we think are most attractive. And so, we're being a little bit ruthless, honestly, in terms of how we're spending our time. We're mostly investing in Europe, and we're exclusively investing in commercial stage companies. So if a company is based in Asia and pre-commercial, it's unlikely that we're going to have an initial phone call. That being said, I think for companies that really are in the sweet spot of what we're trying to do, nothing replaces an introduction from a mutual contact who we really respect and who has brought us great ideas in the past. I think that's the best way to meet investors.
Anything to add, Alex?
Yeah.
No, I think, warm introductions are always, I think, the best way to get sort of through the filters. And I think taking it, the time to target your outreach and make sure that if you're raising a seed round, you're not targeting late stage investors and vice versa, because there's a mismatch in the world of healthcare investing. Everybody's pretty specialized. Most firms are pretty transparent about their investment criteria and strategy in terms of geographically, stage-wise, verticals within the space. And even on those teams, there's people that have concentration areas. So sometimes a company will email all 11 investment professionals twice in the same week, and we'll get to our Thursday meeting and we'll have 22 copies of the same email. And that doesn't reflect well on the company. It suggests that you weren't sort of thinking carefully about who's the right person, is this the right firm, do we fit with their strategy and stage, and within that team, who's the the person that's done the most work in orthopedics or in interventional neuro. So being a little bit targeted and focused, and that's where the intros can help, because if you go through somebody that knows the team, they'll be able to steer you toward the right person and hopefully give you a warm intro. And obviously conferences like these, great opportunities to get connected with folks that maybe aren't in your network and have those discussions. So
I think if you want to, when you're out raising money, you want to be right down the fairway for the investment strategy, the people you're talking to, because otherwise the bar is just higher to get through the investment committee and close the deal, and you want to be spending your time, as much your time as possible, with the people most likely to transact.
Yeah, I like this. It's the ideal word. You get the right person with the right background, that investor, but that requires an enormity of time, right? Think of them. I mean, they look through all the websites and understand which partner does what. I'm fine with the spam, I mean, I'm fine. But there's one thing that can be done to attract our attention, which is explain clearly in a few lines how we're going to make money, which is never there. It's almost about what you've been achieving latest, what the great result you have on clinical trials, which is obviously interesting, but not how we're going to make money. So why don't there's not just an email that says, this is our inspiring story. This is the story that reflects the fact that our exit will be $1 billion. IPO possibly because someone else, same target, same, has done it. And then be inspired by that. We are financial investors, so that's what we need, right? So maybe that will increase a bit the conversion rate. There will always be a conversion rate, that's terrible, but that will increase the conversion rate, email to first meeting.
So that's a good segue into the next question on this. Once you do actually open the deck, or you have enough that was intriguing from somebody who introduced this to you, or you found the email enough to say, let me dig into the deck. I've had people send me a 2-page teaser all the way up to a 55-page deck, which I don't think either of those is appropriate, but this is your call. What do you typically like to see in that introductory deck, enough to say, I'd like to have the management discussion, I'm gonna write them back and say, let's set up a call?
One thing, going back to the previous question as well as to this one, investment eventually at the end of the day, in my eyes, it's a relationship. It starts with a relationship. If you can come up with someone through someone, definitely it's been helpful. But in so many cases, I find that some of those startup companies and entrepreneurs, they don't realize our needs, our expectations, and specifically when it comes down to competition-wise. Say, for instance, AI in radiology. We've been having dozens and dozens of companies coming up with AI in radiology or pathology for various applications, and so many of which stumble into the same wall of scaling and whatever. Mm-hmm. If those companies, and this is merely just an example, but if those companies would have taken into consideration the know-how that resides in the industry for the last 2 or 3 years, whatever, that it's tough to scale, and they may come up with a unique business model, instead of just sending out a generic kind of presentation that we are doing that and we have AI, everybody knows that AI, I mean, it's an enabling tool today, but the use case itself and the business model and the ability to scale, these is what bothers us. These are the things that bothers us. So in order to differentiate yourself, if within that email and presentation there would be a special focus of we are looking to do that and specialize in that, and we have already, aside from references and validations and customer and pipeline, whatever, but this is a unique model that we have created and it was validated, oops, then you stand out. And then it addresses our fears and anxieties of, oh, not again, not just seeing another company with the same thing, same core technology, going to stumble into a wall in 2 years' time. We're not putting $5 million into this one.
Mm-hmm.
I follow, to get that relationship, oftentimes this is a shotgun approach. You can be very targeted, but you've got to start with a lot of these early stage entrepreneurs and founders. They don't know the investment community. So Alexander, from your perspective, what captures your fancy enough to that you want to see in that introductory email, the deck, something that captures your interest to host that call?
So we tend to look at not the 3 T's, but the 5 T's. So the first 3 that everybody knows, team, and I putting them in rank order, team, TAM. So, is this a team we can back? Are they going after a large unmet clinical need in a market that's going to be forgiving? Because usually things don't go according to plan. And so if you're going after a really small opportunity and you miscalibrate, it doesn't leave you a lot of margin. If you're going after a big opportunity, you can reset, you can pivot, and there's still a big opportunity. Mm-hmm. Technology, is it unique? Is it differentiated? Is it protected? But then also, for us at least, kind of timing and terms. So is it the right time? And that sometimes is related to how does this product get reimbursed? So you may have a really good product, a really good market size, a great team, but you've got to go do a 3-year pivotal study and then a 3-year post-approval process to get Category 1 code, and then you can start the fun of talking with commercial payers in the U.S. Yeah. That's a long time frame to sort of underwrite, and so that factors into our process, at least in terms of is it the right time to be investing now versus in a later round, and then obviously the terms. And I think to your point, Diana, that's always kind of missing is like how are we as stewards of our investors' capital going to generate a return, because that's what we're paid to do on behalf of the people that invest in our funds, and thinking about that as the entrepreneur, I think is important. And it's often it's often missing in some of the early stage decks that we see. And I think just saying, hey, here are the precedent transactions, here's how these businesses get valued, here's the buyer universe. If you're going to propose an IPO pathway, then why do you think you're going to be a standalone public company? Because the bar for actually being a successful public company is pretty high. The last 24 months notwithstanding, but I think we're back to kind of normal IPO-able times. And so if you're going to go down a public pathway, it's got to be a huge market. You've probably got to have multiple products in your portfolio, not just one. And it's got to be a big enough opportunity that there's appetite from public investors. So thinking through all of that, but most of the decks we see, I think, address the first three pretty well, but the timing and the terms, that tends to come later in the process. But I think putting it up front, saying here's why you should invest right now, and here's what you should expect if you do, is helpful.
Yeah, I'm always shocked when I'm about to send along a deck to somebody and really nice introduction to the company, but where's the ask? You never said what you're raising and what you're asking for. So
and
these
maybe
key elements in mind.
One other thought on that. Oftentimes there's this dance early on, like, let me give you the non-con deck, and maybe later we can get an NDA in place. And if there's truly proprietary stuff, secret sauce, undisclosed patent information, fine. Don't share that without an NDA. But if it's a published patent, there's no need to be squirrely about it. Your cap table is not, top secret information, right? At some point, the investors you're talking to are going to know how much you raised, from whom, at what valuation, and with what terms. Don't make that process more complicated than it needs to be by going back and forth with lawyers on NDAs, unless there's really something. And in pharma, I think it's much more of an issue, but in device, by the time you're talking with folks like us, you've probably protected the core elements of your technology, and we're not going to take it and start a rival company. We just want to know, like, oh my God, okay, so your cap table is upside down, and that's going to factor into our decision as potential investors. Better to get that out sooner, because if it comes up late in the process, it's like, oh, we really like the opportunity, but now we got to deal with issues on the cap table. Just be transparent, and I think it goes a lot smoother and builds the relationship.
Yeah, just to add to this point, most of the time, clinical data, companies are very jealous of clinical data when they're not published, or preclinical data sometimes as well, when they're not published yet. You don't need to put the entire clinical data and the entire publication draft that's not been published or on the presentation, but just sentence that summarize what the outcome of this data is, not just disclosing anything, but it's just, we have data that shows that, and what the efficacy point or safety point you've demonstrated is, that is not conflicting with anything that's confidential, and that's has tremendous value towards investors. So just feel comfortable of doing that.
Good point.
There's one thing that I'd like to emphasize, maybe in terms of the presentations. Once mapping and profiling the investors, if this is a safe round, or this is an A round, or if you want to bring in strategics or whatever, or I don't know, family offices. But I've been telling our companies, the presentation is eventually your oxygen, burn rate related, whatever. The presentations themselves, this is your oxygen. Just recently, one of our portfolio companies, which is a quite fascinating one, these are drops in your eyes to replace lenses and glasses, post a laser, flash, and quite fascinating. But eventually, the service itself should be delivered, at least initially, in pharmacist chains, like the Walmart Optics, Boots Optics, whatever. And I've been introducing them just recently to one of those chains, and they sent a presentation without this one slide of, specifically indicating which they did have, and I'm the chairman, by the way, so I'm ashamed. But I remember that there was one slide which actually was presenting the go-to-market and bringing in those strategic partners, the Walmart Optics and the Boots Optics, and there were pictures of how the service is going to be delivered. With that specific introduction that I did, this presentation that they sent, just a generic one, they had missed this one slide. And then those guys asked me, so what do we have to do within this? And I was like surprised late at night, and I called them up and said, please do send me the one with this one slide, which was missing. And then all of a sudden, the total dynamic was changed because of one slide. So always, for those of you entrepreneurs, I'm sure most of you are quite experienced, but it's really not the generic presentations, but rather tailor it again and again and again to the specific potential investor that should be addressing that presentation.
Yeah, your core materials, I've always said that your core presentation is it, but what's relevant to who you're sending this to,
Exactly.
and have a different presentation for everyone.
Yeah.
If we could, let's switch a little bit. The session's entitled Venture Investing in the Current Climate. Let's talk not specific to your funds, but just in the general climate, because everybody has a different thesis. And Scott and the LSI team, thanks for putting together just a wonderful, varied group of companies here. What we're hearing a lot from my side is the early stage investing. What's happening with the preclinical and the pre-commercial and pre-regulatory companies. Is the environment there to support this? Is the funding there? I've seen a lot of funds that keep going larger, thus a little bit later stage. Tell us about the environment that from your perspective on the earlier stage.
Well, I think the liquidity on the early stage hasn't changed much because, we raise, each one of us raise funds every 2 or 3, 5 years. And so there's still a lot of money that were raised during COVID time and available. So the liquidity is there. The point is, going back to my previous point, is the financial returns. To make the math on financial returns, we use now comparables that are totally reduced, that have been significantly reduced since 12 months ago, and so everything looks a little bit less exciting. So that's as simple as that. I mean, our financial math is not as exciting as it was, and we are a little bit more conservative and selective. I think this is it. And till the IPO market will not change and will not show that there are still going to be exciting exit opportunities for early stage companies, it's going to remain this way.
Samuel, different perspective, or are you seeing the same elements?
Well, we live on the total opposite sort of side of the value chain in my firm. So 50% what we do is growth stage investing, and then we also do buyout investing. So we're only investing in commercial stage companies. In a couple of points you made, Diana, sound familiar to me. I think one is a bid-ask spread that exists in the marketplace on the growth side. I think there are a lot of companies that did deals in the last couple of years that now feel very expensive, and deal flow has reduced substantially, I think, in that area. I think part of that is because people are waiting to come back to market. Part of it is because it's internal rounds that are being done by existing investors, kind of solving the valuation issue often with structure. The three, we did last year 4 deals, 3 of them were growth deals, 1 was a buyout deal. This year we've done 3 deals, all are buyout deals. And that's because I think the quality of the deal flow that we're seeing is just greater in that part of the world right now.
We've been looking, I think to some extent I totally agree with Diana. In terms of liquidity, I don't know, I think that there's a bit less capital because of just the atmosphere itself. So maybe the funds are there, obviously we are there, but the willingness to deploy capital is definitely a bit different. So what we used to do just for the sake of, looks fine, this and this and this and this, now we shall be scrutinizing much more and going back to basics in terms of the 5 T's, or really how you extract whatever the T's do truly mean. In terms of timing, is it the right timing? Like for going back to your question in terms of, David, for the early stage of those companies, first in human for that matter, some companies should be waiting for the true ability to bring some kind of data before approaching. And in the meantime, they should reduce the burn rate and maybe approach some private investors for the meantime, do some safe rounds, kind of a CLAs and whatever. But approach those of us, maybe the more funds related, the more institutionals related, the more strategic related, in a proper timing, exactly in the proper timing, because that will be, with enough data, this will be one of the criteria. I mean, and this is something that I'm trying to teach some of our companies, which are early stage companies. They did raise like additional $3 million, kind of post the seed stage and whatever, but they need to come up ready for those rounds of financing. I think those companies, the good companies, will eventually be able to fund themselves, as long as they are disciplined, as long as they know what they're doing, as long as they come up with those right answers. So it's in that sense, for us, it is for VCs and for companies, it is going back to basics. It's actually a good thing that is happening now. And I think some of those more fascinating companies will be resulted of that. There are, in some cases, uncertainties of what's the use case, what's the initial, with the core technology, what should be the first use case of a company. This is a major issue. This is something that they need to encounter and talk to VCs and talk to strategics and have some design partners to make sure those early stage companies, then the focus of, in some cases, they're not even sure what will be the first use case. But it's a core technology that maybe will be able to do some. And in that sense, I think this is something that we accept and we are okay with it, to think and to be back and forth and contemplate. But on the others, there has to be true focus answers to, then again, business models and how you contemplate and teams and whatever in the right timing. I think those good companies will be able to sustain even those tough times that we're facing now.
Just another kind of maybe behind the scenes dynamic that's impacting deployment is sort of a fund industry element, which is in 20 and 21, capital was cheap, and there was, I think GPs, investment funds, felt that the environment was propitious for fundraising. And so there was a big increase in velocity of capital deployment because people were able to go back to the market and raise larger funds quickly. I think that in this environment, it happens to be probably one of the worst fundraising environments for investors in decades. And so we start thinking about raising the next fund when we've deployed 70% of the current fund. And so I think the folks that are deploying funds and thinking about portfolio management and their own business are also thinking, how quickly do we want to get back to that 70% and be back in this terrible market for fundraising? And so that dynamic, which is around our business, also relates to the decision making that's happening in ICs.
Back to Assaf's comment. Tell me general trends, Alexander, and what you see going on in the market that excites. I get frustrated when I see somebody that has a platform that can do anything, but they never get one thing done, accomplished. I'm trying to do 6 different things. I know you can, but why don't you get one accomplished in maybe parallel path and have them staggered? But I like the opportunity for platforms, but sometimes they defocus the executive trying to do too much. General attitudes about, I like to see a single technology or something that is more platform oriented?
Oh, yeah. So with respect to my comment earlier about kind of if you're going to propose an IPO as a possible exit, I don't think you can be a single product company. That was my point. But absolutely, at the stage of being a venture-backed company, you should be focused on a single product, right? So it's having the potential to offer a platform, but not necessarily diffusing your efforts so much that you don't get anything done. We see that and agree that's probably best to be avoided. Having focus, having a clear initial market, having an understanding of what the customer needs, what your commercial strategy is and how you're going to bring it to market, how you're going to price it, what your margin structure is, where you're going to manufacture it. Increasingly, and it's unfair for companies at sort of the venture stage to have to think about redundancy in the supply chain, but the last 2 years have taught us that they have to, because otherwise you can have a great product in a great market with a great team, but you can't build it, and so you're dead in the water, right? So it's gotten harder, I think, and I think that entrepreneurs just have to be adaptive and resilient in that context. But yeah, focus remains critical. That you can't spread yourself too thin, because you won't be able to generate enough progress, reach enough milestones ahead of your next financing event if you're trying to do too many things at once. But knowing that your technology, your IP allow you to do that down the road once you've knocked off the first application, the second application, that can be pretty interesting. And I think, Shockwave, Antoine talked about it last night, but that was a great example. They started with peripheral, but they had a plan that included, lower limb and coronary and even structural heart. But that they were focused on one, then the other, and they earned the right to do the others. But from an investment point of view, having that broad breadth of IP and having multiple indications or anatomies where your technology can be applied, I think that's important, and it makes more credible the claim that, hey, this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar public company someday, versus I've got a an incremental improvement in treating lower limb ischemia that's part of a treatment algorithm, but it's one part of it, and it's never going to be a $200 million product line on its own, right? So it's getting that balance right, but having that potential, I think it's important. If you're going to say, hey, I think this is a $1 billion opportunity and we're going to be public one day. If you're saying, no, it's going to be a tuck-in and someone's going to buy me for $200 million with some earnouts, then you don't need that. You can be very focused. But then you have to be really capital efficient and not raise, more money than someone's going to pay for you at exit.
People have asked me, in my particular investment thesis, am I married to any particular segments? I am completely agnostic. Any segment could be exciting to me. It's really about, as you talked about, not just the 3, the 5 T's. Are there any areas that, though, either market or technologies that are really exciting you in the upcoming few years, Diana?
Yes, there are, and all of us have. So,
Yeah.
so I'm a bit surprised you don't. You probably do have to.
I'm not going to admit it on stage. Come on.
No, and I mean, there are segments which are fairly proven in making financial returns and great comparables and great stories. I mean, I can mention, I don't know, recently robotic was very, very hard for the multiples and the transactions value, or I can mention, I don't know, genetics, everything around genetics in IVD was very hot too, or there are some segments where, I mean, everything is, or used to be, is still in favor. And there are segments where it's quite the opposite. Unfortunately, you have really to go against the odds because there is complete lack of success stories, and it's really, everything is still to be proven. We know that, and so we have our preference. And this is where somehow these are things where if you act on a segment or another, you're on the hot one or you're not, and there's nothing you can do about, right, other than try to explain why, if you're on the segment that's not hot at the moment, you'll succeed anyway. So to go back to how to pitch investors, if you are on the wrong segment, it's going to be a lot of pain.
Assaf, you were shaking your
Yeah, within what I initially said, within digital, obviously, digital health, we've been seeing, and we like, we do digital health in devices as well as bioconvergence. Bioconvergence means biology and tech, biology and software, or biology and physics, or biology and chemistry. These are the most cutting-edge disruptive technologies that one can think of. Let it be platforms to cross the blood-brain barrier, let it be tiny robots for drug delivery, whatever. But we have quite a bit of those in Israel, and we have been in Sanara, we invested in 5 of those so-called bioconvergence. But I think the convergence term itself represents something that at least we like in terms of seeing, for instance, the gaming industry now converging into digital therapeutics. So anything that has to do with this is a huge industry going into that. We have some companies, then again in Israel, but not just. Akili, for that matter, went public now, and other companies to, necessarily to avoid drugs at some early, in some setups or whatever. But the gaming industry is definitely converging then again too into healthcare. Cybersecurity, I've been seeing some fascinating technologies, which is becoming just, I think last week I read something about an ambulance services in New York was hacked for ransom, just last week I think I saw it. And it's becoming, unfortunately, more and more popular. So then again, those convergence of domains which were not typically involved in healthcare, like the gaming industry, like the cyber security, converging now into healthcare, I think that's an opportunity as there are definitely players over there. And even though the cyber space, we've been seeing some exits already taking place, at least 2 Israeli companies were bought already. But I think there's a huge, tremendous opportunity for those converging technologies to be major players.
You must have been a 6'8" point guard, because that's a good assist. It's
I was for 1 year. I was a point guard even, and I like it.
It was a good assist and a segue to a question that I was asked as a panelist at a conference last week. Outside of pure digital health, somebody asked, are there going to have to be digital and AI elements to every medtech company that we see? Do they have to have some form of digital attached to it in traditional device?
I mean, I don't think it's a strict requirement, but for sure, more and more the companies that we look at have some element of digital or data in their offering. Some of them are, like Assaf mentioned, truly converging and integrating the tech into therapy delivery. That's probably one extreme. The other extreme, I think, is just the marketing of traditional medical devices is becoming much more digital, and I think that's been a struggle for a lot of traditional device companies because it's not in the, our industry historically was much more comfortable dealing with FDA and notified bodies and insurance company administrators and hospital administrators. It's a pretty low-tech kind of 20th century world. Even on the classic devices that have no, orthopedic implants, there's no digital component to the implant, although some of them are incorporating sensors and accelerometers to measure performance of the implant, after the fact. But even a plain vanilla screw, how you market that, how you approach customers, how you find patients and bring them into your portal. Inspire has done a great job with that in sleep apnea in the U.S. of creating patient pull for a novel therapy. I think, even if you're selling a plain vanilla device, you need to be digital in terms of how you market stuff. But I think more and more that technology is going to be integrated into the solutions, into the products themselves.
Some of you have been at both ends of it. I think we've got about a minute.
Yeah,
Bring us
I'll be
home here
brief.
with your thoughts.
So I think there are certain categories of companies where the digital element is sort of an enabling technology to improve clinical outcomes using approaches that didn't exist 20 years ago. And so that's one category where digital is important. I think the other is where the digital element improves the underlying business quality. So like we always have talked about, capital equipment's harder than consumables. Well, I think, a business that's closer in its characteristics to consumables is software as a service. Getting that monthly invoice paid by customers. And so the extent that digital is able to fundamentally improve the business quality of medtech companies, that's also an area where businesses become more interesting to us as investors.
Well, thank you. I wish we had another 3 hours. It's such engaging discussion, maybe at least for us. I don't know if you'd stay for 3 hours, but thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and I'm not sure what your availability for the next 15 minutes is. If anybody does want to approach it in the panelists, I think we've got a few minutes to be able to do that before the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.